In 10 years, intelligence will power decisions and processes in every organization. However, why is there such a big gap between 95% of enterprise AI projects failing and in seeing inevitably that intelligence will power processes and decisions? Well, that's because AI doesn't have a common language to actually read from, and the pilots that are being done with AI are often disconnected from operational real-time data and really the adoption into putting this into the day-to-day operation. Nevertheless, we do see this trend moving forward. And we're here at Apolix to bridge that gap. Because we're an organization that helps you bring a common language for AI through process intelligence. Let me explain what it is. Within process intelligence, or as you might know it as process mining, we help organizations understand what's happening in reality in their organization. And we believe more is necessary to get scalable AI, namely also process excellence and the AI and automations themselves. We'll focus today on that process intelligence piece. If we take a look at organizations, we see that departments, processes and systems are very disconnected. They don't speak the same language. If you think about an SAP table compared to Oracle, it's a very different understanding on what, for example, a purchase order is. If we look at the organizations, one process can flow through 5, 6, 7 departments through tens of different IT systems. And it's for an organization extremely difficult to actually know what happens in that end-to-end part. If we can already not understand it, how can AI? So that is where we also come in. We help bring that understanding by actually looking at that end-to-end process. And we think of end-to-end processes, when we design them, they're relatively simple, straightforward. If you think of procuring something, someone makes a request, they order it, it's being sent and we receive it. But in reality, we know that the vendor might not always have the laptops, for example, in stock. And that means that the process will have deviations. And even while we design these processes, we do know that those will probably happen, and we have some exceptions in our system that they can take care of it. However, there's so much more that can happen in a process. And if we look at what happens in reality in the organization, we see how processes are actually running. Hundreds of thousands of deviations, different paths that you would never think of yourself. But this is the reality that organizations deal with on a day-to-day basis. Employees deal with by working the extra mile and making sure that the laptops are still being delivered. But an AI cannot just randomly interpret. So if we think of this, right, how does process mining really work? Process mining helps you to get an understanding of an end-to-end process, what's happening in reality, at a real-time basis. So we can steer our processes, but also intelligence and automations can understand what's going on, have the right context, and make decisions upon that. And it starts very simple. We actually start with what we call an event log. An event log consists of digital breadcrumbs, so to say, on where a process flows through. So let's take an example of those laptops again. Think of me working in an organization and needing a new laptop because this one is broken. That means that I go to a portal, think of an internal web shop, order a laptop which is sent to a procurement department. The procurement department waits till a certain number of laptops is being ordered, sends it to a vendor, they deliver the laptops, etc., up until the moment it's being paid. In each of every of those steps, our IT systems actually build a certain trace that helps us recreate what happened in reality. But again, they're disconnected. What happens in those traces, actually it shows us the activity, what happened the moment it occurred, so the timestamp, and also for which order, called a case ID. So which purchase order are we following? When we recreate that, we can see how long it took, for example, between me ordering the laptop and the procurement department ordering at the vendor, or how quickly the vendor delivered towards us and how quickly we paid. And all these pieces of information help us already build a view on how our processes work, flow, and where we can be more efficient. For example, should we be ordering the laptop faster so I can go back to work? Are our vendors actually living up to the standards that they promised us in our contract negotiations? And are we paying on time to be also fair towards a vendor while keeping working capital into account? All of these conversations about process mining and process intelligence enables, because we go further than just those activities. We also look at the contextual data at such cases. So it makes a difference if we order a laptop versus core materials for our production and how quick and how stable our supply chain needs to be. So we add dimensions such as the amount of what we're ordering at, the customers or the vendors that we're ordering at in this case, or what we are ordering. So all this different piece of information helps us improve the conversation and the process improvement areas. Let's actually take a next step and look how this looks like in Celonis, the platform which we use to visualize and understand your processes in order to create this language of process improvement and automation. Taking our procurement process now towards Celonis, we can actually see a representation of the digital breadcrumbs as I just described before. The creation of the purchase order, sending out the purchase order and receiving the invoice, for example. What's interesting about this is that it is not designed and drawn out by us in this system, but this is all based on those digital breadcrumbs that I mentioned before. This view is generated by the data and helps us to look at more things than just the order of activities. For example, if we look at this process, we can take a look between the time between creating the purchase order and receiving the goods. It allows us to understand that it takes 2 days on average, but also can take a look at individual cases where it took longer or shorter. So already by looking at such a simple view, we can better understand how our process flows in reality. Now, what we currently see, you can describe as the Google Maps of your process. We're very much zoomed out and we only see the capitals and the highways between the cities. If we start zooming in, we start looking at the smaller roads or the smaller villages. And by adding more activities, these villages that I just talked about, we see deviations from that designed process as we hoped for. We see, for example, price changes. That means if I order a laptop at a vendor, I expect already a certain price because of the previous agreements or the price catalog that I have with this vendor. Nevertheless, this is not always reality. And we can see that this change price activity is a manual activity where I send out with an expected price, but I have to change it to make sure that we actually will be paying the right price and have the right budget in mind. And this can go in every type of material or even projects that we work with. Zooming in further and further, we see more of these deviations occurring. And also adding the connections, so the roads between the cities and villages, we start seeing a more complex process than we saw before. Keep in mind, we're only looking at the procurement side of things. We can start adding also invoices and other types of data. This view helps us very much understand what happens in reality and start looking at deviations, throughput times, etc. But what we also find interesting to take a look further at is the adherence of processes. What I took here is not only the procurement side, the purchase order, but also the contract and the invoice into account. And we looked where do we see deviations compared to the process as we designed it. We see a whole lot of these deviations depicted right here, and also the change price I just mentioned. So if we look at this behavior, we see it happening here in our process flow. The change price activity is an unexpected activity, and we'd like to also understand the dimensions of this. So we go towards the next screen where we can look at all the use cases that we have and start analyzing them with the contextual data that we have. We call those also value opportunities. Within here, we can select the price change and start looking at the metrics around it. Where do these price changes happen? Here we're looking, for example, at plants. But I find it much more interesting to look at materials or suppliers, because probably there's something wrong with the price catalog based on the experience that we have at other customers. So it's good to have that in-depth view to better understand, is there a certain supplier that is out of range? So we call this here the touchless order rate. How many of our orders go through the invoicing touchless? So I think the supplier Tasty Bites Co. is the first one that we should take a look at, and understand also better what materials we're ordering with them. Where do we see the biggest problem occurring? As you see, we can go quite deep into certain materials. We can understand when those purchase orders happened. Maybe there's some seasonality in this. And it helps us very much understand on a super low level, even on the purchase orders themselves, where this happened and probably also why this happened. As you can see, this is not all automated because it's also a conversation starter. There's multiple improvement areas that can get out of this. We can start changing the process. Maybe something went wrong there. We could make adjustments in our IT systems, in our ERP system, for example, or certain automations that we already have deployed. We can add more automations, or we can change the way how people work. We change management, their behavior, ensuring that they don't make mistakes, for example, in the process. And depending on which is the best solution forward, we can help either with deploying such automations or help your organization make the changes to create value in this process. What's great about this, because we're looking again at a real-time overview of what happens in our process, we can immediately track the impact of those changes that we made. Even though they're outside of your IT system or outside of Celonis, we should be seeing, for example, for this vendor, a reduction in price changes. And what we can start looking at is the monitoring part of it. Of course, there's multiple interesting other areas like free text or three-way match, but we've been looking at the touchless purchase order rate. And in this example, we implemented an orchestration via Celonis, so an automation that prevents those manual touches from happening. And what we can see after this improvement, we see the touchless rate actually increasing. So taking a step back from Celonis, what we actually saw is 4 phases within this demo, and this is also how we improve our processes. First of all, we had the digital twin, which helps us to find inefficiencies in our process and actually understand what's going on. Based on these inefficiencies that we found, we started contextualizing them and actually framing the potential value. Think of the manual changes, how often they occur, and also start adding how much time these manual changes take. It helps us understand the opportunity that we have to improve and fix our process. And that's also the next step, fixing the inefficiency. And we can do it in multiple ways. It can be within Celonis with some of the automation it's offering, but also outside of Celonis itself. For example, by changing your ERP system, making fixes in there, changing your process, the order of the activities and how things should be executed, changing how your people work, for example, with change management, extra trainings, making sure to do the right thing at the right time, every time. But the beautiful thing is of this digital twin is that we're not having a one-time snapshot of how your processes look like, but it's constantly monitoring what's going on in real time. That also helps us and allows us to start checking out what happens after we fixed a process in order to get into the foster phase. Not only tracking the value that we created with such a fix, but also monitoring if that fix is actually working day after day, or that we need to still tweak or change something around that. Bringing this to an entire circle, it helps us to create a better process and start looking for other opportunities, again, in the find phase. So if we think of process intelligence, it's part of your process optimization, business process management journey. Whereas at the start, we really focused back in the days on drawing out our processes, for example, with brown paper sessions within BPMN. And if you start thinking around how we navigate around the world with our car, you should compare this with the big street books, address books, which helps us to figure out where we need to go. It had a lot of problems. For example, you needed to have and skip through multiple pages throughout your route. The map was never up to date. For example, it didn't show traffic. Bringing that towards a newer live version or a up-to-date version was with the introduction of, for example, TomTom. See this as your business process management tool that has one single source of truth, an up-to-date version on what needs to happen, why it needs to happen, to actually help you navigate without going through multiple pages. Then process intelligence came there as well. And see this as navigating with Google Maps. You know at the live moment what traffic is doing, you know all the disruptions on the road, and it can help you the most effectively get through your destination with the best route possible. And this is process intelligence. It understands what's happening, it understands why it's happening, it understands where it's happening. So it helps you make the right decisions throughout your process on a day-to-day or on an analytical basis. So if we have all the information on what our processes look like, where we want to go and how we should go there, why make the decisions ourselves? Why don't we autonomously orchestrate our processes like a self-driving car is driving to your destination automatically? And that's what we help you with, helping you become an autonomous organization where intelligence is driving your decisions and your processes. In summary, process intelligence is a way to create a digital twin of your organization based upon all the different IT systems and departments that you have. We create a representation of these end-to-end processes in real time to understand what happens, why it happens, and how it should happen. And this creates the intelligence layer for AI to help you automate and orchestrate all of your processes and decisions to form an autonomous organization. If you enjoyed this video, give the video a like and subscribe to our channel for much more content around process intelligence and AI.